and we'll get started. All right, so hello and welcome from the entire TiPS team here. This is our first ever virtual discussion session. Today we'll be speaking on the topic of allyship. We have two incredibly gifted speakers to share their thoughts and respond to your questions at the end of the session. We'll try to wrap things up around 7:15 today. My name is Melvin Christopher. My pronouns are he and him. I work in the Ontario Public Service and the Ontario Digital Service and now the Treasury Board, and I will be your moderator for today's session. You'll have an opportunity to ask your speakers some questions after a bit of the guided questions that I've prepared for them. So we'll just give us some time for that. There's also a donation link to BLM, and there's a book called Until We Are Free, Reflection on Black Lives Matter in Canada, that one of our chat moderators will drop in the link as well too. But before we get started, I would first like to acknowledge the location of today's meeting, where I, the moderator, am joining as a gathering place for many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I acknowledge we are meeting in an area covered by Treaty 13, also known as the Toronto Purchase, and I pay respects to the Mississaugas of the credit as well. So we're trying to make a very inclusive space here today. So our intent with hosting a session like this is to provide that safe space and a platform for open and honest dialogue. We understand that these conversations are often difficult, complex, and can be triggering for some. We ask that all attendees engage in dialogue in a respectful manner, being mindful of our words, actions that may harm identifying as part of a marginalized community. If at any moment during the session you feel unsafe, please feel free to take a break and join the conversation when you best feel. So please also feel free to send us a private message to one of our chat moderators. That's either me, Sarik, or Thar, or you can email us back at our TiPS page as well too, and we'll assist you in any way possible. Before we kind of get into things, I know we have a lot of folks on the line, and some of you may not know who we are as TiPS. So for many of you, that's the first time interacting with us, welcome and thank you for being here. We are a non-partisan network for all Tamil Canadians working or interested in politics and government and their allies. We here at TiPS have a dual mandate, the first being connections among Tamil Canadian public servants from all orders of government, and to build bridges between the government and the Tamil community. We hope through conversations like this will continue to happen, and if you're interested in connecting with us more, please feel free to reach out. And a part of allyship is to have folks in leadership help amplify our voices. And in accordance with our mandate to build connections and build bridges, I want to introduce the Assistant Deputy Minister of Ontario's Anti-Racism Directorate, Nosa Ero-Brown, to share a few words. The Anti-Racism Directorate goal is to build a more inclusive society and works to identify, address, and prevent systemic racism in government policy, legislation, programs, and services. With that note, I welcome Nosa to share a few words for us. Nosa?
Thank you very much, Melvin, and good evening, everyone. It is a true honor to be part of this discussion this evening. Thank you so much, Rosshane, for making space for me to be here today. As of 12 days ago, not years, I feel very privileged to be working as the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Anti-Racism Directorate, and I really look forward to dismantling systemic racism and making continued positive changes along with all of you and all of the allies that are working inside and outside of government on this. Just a bit of my background before I give a couple of remarks. I am Nigerian. I'm an immigrant. I was somebody who came to this country as a refugee with my family. I identify with a lot of our stories and a lot of the stories of OPSers who have come before me. A recent quote that I read before I took on this position says, "It's not enough to be quietly non-racist. Now really is the time to be vocally anti-racist." And the moment has never been more clear in my head, and I'm really excited about my new mandate and knowing that there are other people who are, working alongside me. So as we've learned, being anti-racist includes talking about all forms of racism openly and clearly, and self-educating as well, and being accountable for our own learning journey. And just a few months back, these conversations we're few and far between in the workplace, and I'm so encouraged. In fact, our deputy minister, who I see is on this call with me, and I were just at another ministry talking about the conversation to do with anti-racism and how we're going to be effecting change. A lot of ministries are now opening their doors. We've been quiet for a long time, and now it's time to really kick down the door open to continue this conversation. So this is why the Anti-Racism Directorate recently also shared within the Ontario Public Service some tools with our teams to really help to start to engage in the conversations about anti-racism broadly, but about anti-Black racism as well. And we are looking forward to sharing these resources wherever we can outside of the OPS as well. We know these conversations are urgent and they're important. They need to start now, and they've started long before now even. And to date, we're proud of all of you who have stepped forward to say we need to listen, we need to be part of the solution. We know that Black, Indigenous, and racialized individuals experience racial stress, racial trauma in different ways as a result of real and perceived racism every day in the workplaces. And of course, our government has zero tolerance for this. The Anti-Racism Directorate is really looking at the issue from both the internal in the OPS space and also on the external front as well. So on the internal front, we do administer the Anti-Racism Act, which was developed 3 years ago, and that really informs our strategic plan. There is a lot of work behind this, and now is the time with the momentum to seize upon it to really start to implement. With respect to what we're doing in terms of building our capacity on the inside, we have some tools that we're working on with public servants, and we'll be releasing those very soon for those who want to take training and to support our managers. We're looking forward to diversifying our senior leadership as well. And this is a goal that we've had long before this year. We're also looking at how to use our data, and I'll be leveraging some of the work I've done in the OPS to be able to advance the release of that race-based data. On the external front, we have a number of programs actually, and that we try to apply an anti-racism lens to. We're developing targets and indicators to measure effectiveness across the priority areas of justice, education, and child welfare. And again, collecting race-based data in those specific sectors, and really look forward to sharing this data, and not only sharing it, but really pushing to see how it could inform the work in those sectors to make sure that we have the outcomes that we're looking for, because that's what this is all about. It's not only about sharing information, it's not only about educating ourselves, it's really the outcomes for all racialized people and for Black and Indigenous people. So in closing, we know that real change will come from action, like I said, and not words. I would like to continue to be a partner in this with you. The Anti-Racism Directorate is here with you. Let us continue these community discussions and be vocally anti-racist in our allyship journeys. And thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate the space to connect. Thanks.
Thank you, Nosa. And I think we can give a big thank you from our team to know that we have the backing from the ARD. And I think we're all thrilled to have you as the ADM of ARD as well too. So thank you very much. No problem. Before I welcome our speakers, I just want to quickly run how this evening will be structured. I just have a set of 4 questions that will just kind of guide the discussion moving forward. If you do have anything to follow up with, just drop it in chat. I can ask Pascale or Darshika those specific questions, but we will leave quite a bit of time for you folks to ask questions at the end. So you will definitely have your time, I promise you that. So as I said earlier, this is meant to be a welcoming space. So our intent with hosting this session is to provide that space platform for that honest, open dialogue. And I will do my best to make sure the conversation is guided and focused to have that space. So with all that said, let's get into it. Both our speakers are very incredibly accomplished. So I will preface that this is a short version of their bios, but please check our Instagram at TiPS and PS for their full bios. First, I'll start with Darshika. I want to welcome Darshika. She works for the Toronto Community Benefits Network as a coordinator for training capacity on a federally funded project to increase diversity and representation of Indigenous people, women, and newcomers in the Red Seal construction trades. Currently, Darshika continues her work for justice for Tamils in Sri Lanka with Pearl and is a member of the Gender Equity Committee of Tamil Canadian Center for Civic Action. Welcome, Darshika. Do you want to say a couple of few words or do you want me to pause for the question?
Sure. I just want to say thank you for having me, TiPS, and for everyone being on this call. I think we're really in the midst of social and political and economic change in very real ways. And I'm honored to be a part of this conversation. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Darshika. Next is Pascale, hailing from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Pascale is a communication specialist, digital specialist, educator, and community organizer. In 2014, Pascale co-founded Black Lives Matter Toronto, the first international chapter of Black Lives Matter movement, a trans feminist movement committed to the preservation of Black art, Black space, Black families, and Black life. Pascale is a core organizer of BLMTO's biggest actions, including BLMTO Tent City and Halting Toronto Pride, to highlight the over-policing of Black, queer, and trans community. So welcome, Pascale. You want to say a couple few words or do you want me to wait for the questions as well?
Hi. Hello. Happy to be here.
All right, let's get into things. So as I said before, if you folks have any specific questions, I'll be happy to follow up as time permits. So the first question I'm actually going to pose to everyone. So if you have a thought, just please drop it in the chat. But I'll start with Darshika. What is an ally? So I'll ask that for everyone. Please drop what your thoughts are around that in chat. And more specifically, what is an ally? Why do we need allies? Can you speak to what performative allyship is and how do we become an effective ally?
Okay, thank you for that question, Melvin. And I'd like to start off the conversation by recognizing that we have a lot of work to do in Canada in challenging anti-Black racism. And I think that it's important that we say the names of Jermaine Carby, Andrew Loku, Vijay Korchinski Paquette, and so many others who have been killed by, as a result of police brutality at the hands of the police, and whose families are yet to receive justice. And in saying that, I think it's important that I start off by stating that allyship is a verb and not a noun. I know the Assistant Deputy Minister Nosa for the Anti-Black Racism Directorate, she had mentioned this as well, and I appreciate that because to me, allyship is really challenging anti-Black racism and moving forward and from the conversation of defunding the police. Like that's where the conversation is currently, and I think we're past being able to debate whether or not this should happen. So by this, when I talk about challenging anti-Black racism and allyship, I'm also locating myself as a racialized person, as a Tamil person, as a non-Black identified person. And so allyship to me, it means taking direction from Black, queer, and trans members of the community, recognizing the violence that has been done, but also how we are complicit in this violence as racialized folks and white allies that may participate in this work. So this means how do the policies and procedures we all put in place in our work in the public sector impact Black and Indigenous bodies? And how are we taking up space to support our Black colleagues in the workplace, but also in public space as members of our community? As Tamil people, we are implicated and impacted by colonialism and the machinery that is racism. Do we mobilize our model minority privilege in order to draw closer to whiteness through supporting work around soft skills and etiquette training that depoliticizes the work we do every day? Or do we believe and do the learning and understanding that when we challenge anti-Black racism, we dismantle racism as a whole? In saying this, I locate myself, as I said, as a non-Black person of color in this conversation of allyship, which means that I'm actively working on how to be an ally every single day. This means that everything I say today exists in a realm that centers the Black community, Black voices, and Black bodies first and foremost. So we as Tamil folks, we have a lot of work at hand, and I think that we need to recognize that we personally participate in furthering anti-Black racism and how we do this. And if we are against the call for defunding the police, which is a long overdue call, what biases do we hold that require further unlearning? This means not limiting our work to solely a post on social media. I think it goes into this kind of performative activism that you were speaking about earlier. And it's about engaging in the realm of work we do and unlearning. And the unlearning has to be lifelong, but the work to support community has to be in tandem. The two are intimately connected. I'd like to continue to the second part of the question around social media and performative allyship. I want to highlight that social media is a great tool to mobilize public uprising on issues. It draws attention in stealth speed to the issue and allows us to mobilize people. But it is exactly that. It's a tool to public awareness and building pressure on education. It's not the only tool. Direct action, petitions, democratic engagement, lobbying are one of the many tools. And I wanted to draw attention to a practice and a framework that we've used in the student movement in the Canadian Federation of Students. I know I used to be an executive at the York Federation of Students, and during my days in the student movement, along with my sister in the movement, Pascale, there's a model that we work through, which is research, education, and mobilization. And so as BLM and many other leaders internationally have shown us over the past years, and more recently in the recent months, is that there are multiple points of contact that require our support, whether it's the research phase, whether it's the education and awareness phase, or whether it's the mobilization. And these can happen online, but also more prominently offline. Granted, with COVID, we're in a position where it puts us and those most precarious who need to mobilize in very precarious situations, and safety is obviously first and foremost, which is why online activism is so important. But whether it's letter writing, whether it's making phone calls or having conversations like this and hosting further conversations and doing that unlearning, we have so much more further to go. On the point of intersectional allyship, I think it's important that we coin the term and give respect to the individual who identified the term and defined it, intersectionality, is Kimberly Crenshaw. And I think it's important when we talk about intersectional allyship that it's a matter of recognizing that I am racialized, hetero, cisgendered, visibly able-bodied woman who fled genocide with my family to arrive in Canada and occupy this space as a settler on Indigenous land with respect to caste and class privileges. The list goes on. So these aspects of my identity allow me to take up space, and some aspects of my identity impact me as a member of historically underrepresented groups that deny me access to space and opportunity. And this is very much the case for all of us. Our identities are complex. So I think that conversation is really about how do we navigate this space and how do we use our privilege to support communities in breaking down those doors and gaining access.
Thank you, Darshika. I'm just going to pass the floor to Pascale.
Hi, everyone. Damn, Darshika. Damn. Thank you for having me. This is such important conversations, and I think that we're in a very pivotal time right now. I think all of the times are really pivotal, but I think right now, what we have right now in our benefit is we have a lot of eyes, and so this is just a very important conversation in this moment. My thoughts and notes are not nearly as organized, so I'm going to try my best not to word vomit, but that's probably what you're going to get. I think the most important thing I took away from what you said, Darshika, is that allyship is a verb, right? And it is a continuous act. It is it's never a one-stop destination. And allyship, like love, are words that are verbs, right? And these are two words that I think that we think of as, you know, I embody love, I show love, so that's it. But we recognize when we, you know, are in relationships, marriages, you know, partnerships, friendships, that the love we show actually has to be continuous. It's the same with allyship. And allyship justice seeking was one of the greatest forms of love. It is one of the biggest ways that you can show love. I think right now we are in a very pivotal time, and our movement and what we are creating and the allyship we are showing has to be rooted in love, real love. I think of the word allyship a lot, and I think I struggle with this word a lot. Like I said, we're in a very pivotal moment, and so we have all of these kind of conversations that are happening right now. And I think I struggle with the word allyship often because I find that, you know, for people, it's an identity. For people, it is, you know, the hashtag of their Twitter bio. It is, you know, the literal or metaphorical button that they wear on their shirt that says ally. But as, you know, somebody in the front lines, as somebody who is in the background as well, as somebody who is inside the system, outside the system, I see such a need for further, you know, for further pushing. A good friend of mine, her name is Paige Galette. She summed it up to saying, you know, we don't need more allies, we need more comrades. And that resonates with me so deeply, right? We don't need more allies, we need more accomplices. We need more, I think, tangible, sustainable ways that you are engaging within our movements. And I think the difference between what I think of as allyship versus, and I'm complicating the word, right? It's not a bad word, but I'm complicating it and allowing for a little bit more nuanced thinking. I think when I think about differences between accompliceship and allyship is that accompliceship, the kind of comradeship that we need, is so decentered from the ego. It actually is separate from you. It doesn't serve yourself. It doesn't benefit you. You are giving something at the expense of yourself, right? Like to leverage, to be an ally, to be in solidarity with means that you are giving something that you have to another, and recognizing that you may never get a thank you. You may never get a receipt. You may never get a reimbursement. You may never get, you may not get what the things that we get that serve our ego, if that makes sense. And that kind of brings me to like kind of the second point of this question is to like social media and performative allyship. You know, on June 2nd, that was the day of the, I forgot what it's even called, the Black Box Day. I can't even remember the actual name of it, but you know what it was. I logged into my social media at like 10 a.m. when I woke up, and I was like, what is this? Like, what is happening? What did I miss out on? That's how I also understand that I'm aging a little bit. Sometimes social media things happen, and I'm like, how the fuck do I don't know what this is. So I'm like scrolling, and I'm like, what is this? And I laugh about it and I can find joy in it now, but at the time when I started to realize what it was like really, really disheartening. And it was disheartening for a lot of reasons. It was disheartening because what in the hell does a black box do? Tangent aside, what does it serve? It was frustrating because this is actually a tactic that we used years ago. And that doesn't mean to say there's anything wrong from learning from what we've done, but years ago we recognized that it was ineffective. Years ago we recognized, and the exact same thing happened this time, you know, we're using a hashtag, we're putting up these pictures, and we're actually blocking out people who need to get the message out, right? So June 2nd, that's what happened. Everybody, and again, not knocking you if you did do the black boxes, but allowing for further conversation to challenge those kind of thinking. What had ended up happening was that day, the call to do the black boxes didn't actually come from Black organizers, they came from Black celebrities. And so what ended up happening that day was folks were using the hashtag Black Lives Matter while there was actually organizers on the ground that were trying to use that hashtag to be able to disseminate information. And it was getting blocked by these freaking black boxes. And so even in that moment, and very quickly, I think people kind of caught on, was like, oh my God, like this is kind of being counterproductive. But that to me was so frustrating because I think that we were able to see very clearly what fake allyship looks like. Right? It didn't serve anything. It didn't draw attention to anything. It didn't help anybody. It didn't serve anybody. It didn't bring justice to anybody. It didn't do anything. But what it did do is that it for so many people, and we know those people, right? We all know those people on our timelines. I'm like, oh, you had a black box 2 weeks ago, but I guess Black lives don't matter now, right? Like people who in the moment feel compelled to, you know, show their activism, show their allyship, but like it don't go beyond that. Right. And that's why I say that what we actually need is, you know, solidarity that actually removes yourself entirely. That is not you posting on social media and letting everybody know how much your political thought is so advanced. It's actually you having difficult conversations with the loved ones in your family. It's actually like, it's so far beyond social media. And again, like, I complicate that because I know that social media, especially in the age of Black Lives Matter, social media is what actually saved a lot of lives. It's actually what brought justice to a lot of families. And so there is such a need for it, but that can't be where we are. That cannot be where we begin and end. That cannot be. And it is so dangerous if that is where we think that is how we center our activism around, because it's not like, social media isn't real, y'all. Like, it's not real. It doesn't do anything to actually, like, it doesn't make my life matter more. It doesn't make conditions for me a little easier. It allows for conversations to happen, for sure, but like, we need more tangible ways to support our communities. And so, yeah, I think moving away from performativeness, and we have to think about how do we separate our egos. Even things that's like simple as, you know, when I see these GoFundMes, there's a lot of GoFundMes that are around right now, which I think further indicates that it should send as an indicator to everybody how close Black people are living to poverty. That's why we see so much GoFundMes in this moment right now. Even as something as you know, when I donate to GoFundMes, I don't put my name. And that's me challenging myself. And it's difficult because of course I want to add my name there, but I understand that I'm serving the ego. I'm not actually serving any purpose, right? So things like that, little things like that we can challenge. What do we gain out of this? And if there is a gain, then we're serving our own ego. We may be supporting communities that are in need, but it's to appease our own guilt or make us feel better about the privilege that we may have. Yeah. Allyship, I think, is love in action. And yeah.
Thanks, Pascale. I did pose a question earlier to folks that what allyship was, so I'll answer it based off what I kind of heard. I think I was initially going with the allyship as a verb, not a noun, and then I like the way Pascale kind of pulled it. That is love is like a verb that we just recognize it and it has to be a continuum that's rooted in love. That's my answer that I'm going to steal from both of you. But yeah, once again, I will want to pose that to everyone. So if you do have a moment, please just drop it in the chat there. My second question, I'm going to start with Pascale this time. Many of us in this room are public servants, and we do have some leaders in the room as well too. How do we better become allies to advance the causes of underinvested and oppressed and the oppressed communities that we serve as public servants?
I think the first is be prepared to hear and feel the wrath of oppressed communities, Black communities particularly. I think oftentimes, you know, like, I'm in conversations with people who are, whether in their places of leadership or whatever, and they're like, you know, I did this thing and this person was like really angry. I'm like, yeah. Existing as a Black person, a Black poor person, a Black queer person, a trans person is really exhausting. And so if you are in a position of leadership and you have the ability to make change, like, if you are expecting to be, you know, bowed to, have kisses at your feet, that's not what this work is about. And rather you are in a position to correct years worth, decades worth of wrongs, right? And so it's actually a duty. It is a duty as a leader to actually rectify injustice. I think secondly, what I would also say is that it is absolutely crucial to take direction from the communities most affected. So in this moment right now that we're talking about, like, Black Lives Matter, whatever, we're talking about anti-Black racism specifically, take direction from those communities that actually are trying to dictate what does safety look like for us. Darshika mentioned it very perfectly. Like, Black communities right now, nationally across this country are talking about defunding the police. And it's a very awkward conversation, right? It's a very awkward conversation for particularly like racialized communities that, you know, for some of us, the police are acts of safety. For some of us, you know, when we come from, you know, countries that are like my home country that is in upheaval, that are in, you know, in the middle of an uprising, have been in the middle of an uprising for years, you know, sometimes the police are actually the only people who can help, right? In different communities. If, you know, for some of us, you know, who come from very impoverished communities, our sibling, our auntie or whatever found found wealth or found economic justice by becoming cops. So it's a very awkward conversation to have within our communities, but in racialized communities particularly. But in talking about anti-Black racism, and when we talk about how Black people are experiencing the world completely differently than everybody else, Black people are saying, actually, we do not need the police to exist. And while amongst a group of people that are, that are groups of Tamil people, have that conversation amongst yourselves to be like, this is what Black people are calling for. How can we actually answer the questions amongst ourselves that are the tricky parts about this conversation? And these conversations are tricky, right? Like, it's not an easy conversation to bring to, it's not an easy conversation to bring to my immigrant parents to be like, this wouldn't exist. This shouldn't exist. It's not an easy conversation to bring to survivors who are like, what's going to happen to my rapist, right? Like, it's a very, very tricky conversation, but doing that work to actually to have those conversations because you know that you are furthering what Black people are calling for. And in that also, like, self-organized too. There's a couple groups that I kind of want to shout out for doing that very well. Doctors for Defunding and Doctors for Defunding, I can talk about right now. They're a group of doctors. I don't actually really know a lot about them, but they have kind of organized amongst themselves as people who are in the health profession, public health workers, doctors, medical professionals that are literally drawing inspiration from the movement that Black people are doing right now and adding their occupation as we co-sign this, right? They are providing a different angle to the conversation by talking about the fact that actually, as health workers, we have to acknowledge that anti-Black racism is a health issue, right? So they're adding a different perspective while still simultaneously taking complete direction from direction from Black communities. And I imagine that, again, amongst that circle of doctors, it's a difficult conversation. It's probably a really difficult conversation, but they are doing that work to organize and educate amongst themselves. The second group I want to talk about, I don't actually think that they're formalized in the same way that Doctors for Defunding are, but back in 2016, am I talking too quick also? Okay, thank you. I have a habit of just back in 2016 when we were occupying TiPS, Toronto Police Headquarters. We were protesting the murder of Andrew Loku, a name that Darshika mentioned, but he was a South Sudanese refugee that was murdered by police in his home while he was dealing with mental health distress. And I always put refugee because I think I am a refugee, and I imagine that there are folks in this room here who also are refugees, and we know what it is like to cross borders. We know what it is like to leave our homeland, leave siblings, aunties, grandparents we may never know again in hopes of a better life. And this individual did that, and he was killed by the body that is supposed to protect him, right? And so we were camping out for about a couple of weeks trying to draw attention to this, and a group formed called Sikhs for Black Lives, or Black Liberation. And it was folks who were Sikh literally organizing amongst themselves, doing whatever contribution that they could to help support us. And again, taking direction from Black communities and recognizing, actually, while we're camping out, they need food. Okay, we all know a bunch of aunties, we all know a bunch of uncles who can cook food, and we can all deliver it, right? And so we can be creative as to, I don't know if this is particularly answering your question. Yeah, we can be creative as to how we are supporting Black communities while still organizing ourselves and taking direction from those who are most affected.
No, that totally answers the question. And I do see Sarika dropping a couple links for those groups, the Doctors for Defunding Twitter page.
Thank you.
Thank you for that as well. Darshika, I'm going to pose the same question to you.
Awesome. Yeah, Pascale, you're talking about speaking fast, and I tend to go on this marathon where I slow down, and then once the passion builds up, I'm zipping through. So feel free to signal if I'm speeding ahead. To follow up on what Pascale had said, the question, Melvin, was as public servants, right? As people that work in the public sector and the leaders that are in the room, how do we become better allies to advance the cause of underinvested and historically underrepresented communities, is how we like to say it at the Toronto Community Benefits Network. And I think to start off, I think it's important to recognize that this is about engaging the social, economic, and political understanding of how we dismantle racism. And so the OPS, right, is where many of you work. And that is in Ontario, the Ontario Public Service, which is Ontario, the word Ontario defines the political nature and the scope and region. And then when we talk about public, we're talking about public tax dollars that are going into these services. And that's the economic aspect of the conversation and how that translates into the day-to-day lives of people. And then last but not least, it's the social location of it. When in the Toronto Community Benefits Network world of things, when we talk about community benefits, we often talk about social and local qualifiers and identifiers when it comes to the redistribution of wealth and regeneration of wealth for underrepresented communities when we talk about supports for Black youth. And I talk about that in my realm of things, but also in relating to folks in the room who are the decision makers. And I'm going to cite two cases that are going on right now that I think give us real life examples in addition to what Pascale has said about people doing important work on the ground, such as the Doctors for Defunding and other folks in the space. There is the CBC article from June 23rd, 2020 that talks about countless instances of anti-Black racism in Ontario Public Service, lawyers allege. So 45 lawyers working in the Civil Law Division of the Ministry of Attorney General are speaking out against what they describe as countless instances of anti-Black and anti-Indigenous racism on the job. The lawyers sent a letter obtained by CBC News to the Secretary of the Cabinet, Stephen Davidson, who oversees the OPS. The letter sent out on June 12th outlined several incidents in which the lawyers say racialized employees face discrimination and harassment. Many of you on this call work in the OPS, and it's important to know that this is the struggle within the workplace and creating space for Black caucus members, whether they're within political spaces or parties or within public space, within your offices, having those spaces where during this time of uprising, you know, Pascale talked about the GoFundMe pages because folks are really struggling in these environments to be able to work and produce, but also your Black allies and your colleagues need your support in this time to check in, for self-care, for space to discuss these things, to not brush it under the rug, to address anti-Black racism head on. Another case of this within the public service is I'm going to reference a Toronto Star article from March 13, 2019, where Black women sued the Ontario Public Service alleging systemic racism. And so I think about this and I think about misogynoir. What misogynoir is anti-Black racism towards women and femme folks, right? And I think that it's directly connected to the lack of services that many of these Black identified folks, racialized Indigenous folkmen that we all face, but more so Black folks within the community and the communities that folks are coming from. Because after we leave our desks, our offices and our work, we go back to our communities and we become a part of civil society. And we become a part of our families who are living and struggling to put food on the table. And so I think that's where we naturally, for me, it's very natural that we go to this conversation. It's quite timely that we have this conversation about defunding the police. Because if we look at, we've talked about it provincially, but if we look at it municipally and federally as well, there is a call to defund the police at all levels of government, whether it's the RCMP policing Indigenous communities, right? We've seen time and time again, the Alberta freezing deaths. We've seen the way that Indigenous people that resisted to claim and identify and protect their land during the Oka crisis. We've seen missing and murdered Indigenous women and the call for justice for these Indigenous women go unsilenced. In Toronto, we're seeing a motion that came forward to our city council and to defund the police budget. The call for Black Lives Matter is 50%. I support that call. I stand by it. But the 10% call was in the motion that was brought forward by Councillor Kristen Wong-Tam and Councillor Josh Matlow. And the police budget is over $1.1 billion, which is more than public funding allotted to libraries, housing, shelters combined. So the Black community, Black Lives Matter has made it very clear that the call is to reallocate those funds and redistribute them, because what it is it's calling up, the call to defund the police is also a call to defund jails, prisons, immigration detention centers, the Canadian Intelligence Service, CSIS, and the Canadian Border Services agencies. Because when we talk about vulnerable bodies, whether it's to status, whether it's to immigration, as the Tamil community, we cannot brush it under the carpet that we fled genocide and we continue to flee genocide and face it. And so in that, we are complicated in this because we cannot be settlers on one land and be silent in the face of the genocide of Indigenous, Black, and racialized bodies. And yet we understand the cost at which, you know, your home's being taken away, standardization, where you're not allowed access to education in schools, ongoing settlement, and imperialism, and there being, you know, 2 soldiers for every civilian in the Northeast, the over militarization of regions. Like, this translates in Canada and this translates internationally. And the reality is that those in positions of power are working together in order to be able to teach each other the tools to silence marginalized communities within those nation state borders. And so it's super important that in order to challenge anti-Black racism and to be able to come up with policy alternatives that can create safer spaces, we need to be able to transcend those borders that were created not by us. Like, you know, there's a common in the immigration justice movement, there's a chant that said, we didn't cross the borders crossed us. And so when we eliminate those borders, we're going to come up with creative alternatives to dismantling those systems and generating policy alternatives that are going to benefit the people that we are in the place to serve.
Can I just add?
Yeah, go ahead, of course.
Can I just add? I also think that, like, I love the fact that you expanded on all of the different kind of policing that needs to end, because I think people get very focused on this Toronto police budget, and I'm like, Toronto, Calgary, Edmonton, all of it needs to go up. All of it needs to go. And I think even on top of that, all different forms of policing as well, right? Because sometimes it's not the police that brings harm to our communities. It's the social workers. It is the teacher that calls the police. It is so many different agents that act as punitive ways to interact with Black communities. We deal with issues, concerns, violence, anything that happens in our communities by doing something after versus preventative, right? Like, all of our focus is on punishing for crime versus trying to prevent it. When we know that the core root of crime is poverty. Imagine if we reimagine even 50%, even 10%, that is not sufficient in the slightest. But even if that small amount of number could go back into programming, go back into services, go back into money for our communities, imagine what could actually happen. That's actually what we're asking for when we talk about defunding. We are talking about actually reimagining a society that we can create and think about our own safety and determine what our own safety is and how to protect each other and ourselves.
Thank you both. Quickly, in the interest of time, I think I'm only going to ask one more question before I hand the floor back to the folks on the line. So I'll try to package both of them as one. How do we, and it kind of stemming from the conversation we're having as well too, is how can we better show solidarity to our Black and Indigenous communities while making meaningful connections between their lived experiences and our own as Tamil Canadians? And Darshika, I'll start with you for this one.
So I'm gonna, in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep it short. I think it's important to look at our self-care as something that's ongoing. When we talk, I'll start with the latter question, the part of being mindful of self-wellness and health. Engaging in this work is also part of that healing. And in order to be able to heal, we have to reflect on where our own personal social locations, where they operate in violent systems, right? So by this, I mean looking at, not looking at ways that of healing that have often been appropriated, such as like yoga and oils and incense that have been appropriated and demonized within communities internationally for generating this knowledge, but being able to redistribute, being able to navigate that and go back to indigenous ways of learning from in our own roots, and being able to invest that time and those resources and the unlearning back into the communities that generated that knowledge. Pascale just said something, right? She said, you know, thank you to me for generating or talking about the other levels. BLM did that work. I just went to the BLM website, referenced it, and brought that forward. I have to credit BLM and the workers and the people in BLM like Pascale, who are working day in and day out for the last month in the midst of COVID to generate this knowledge for us. This is the least that I can do. And literally, this is only the beginning of the conversation, if I'm being quite honest. I think that we as a community, and particularly at TiPS, it's quite brave. And I think it's amazing that we've, you know, generated and started this conversation off. But there's a very honest conversation that's implicated in our own space, which is, you know, there are folks who work in the police. There are folks whose jobs are generated by systems of the police, and we are able to put food on the table for our families at the expense of Black and brown bodies. Now, that's not to say that we have to, you know, beat ourselves up and attach ourselves to the ego and disconnect from the larger systemic issue. We're all implicated in it. But I think in doing that, we also have to do the work of taking direction to find out how it is that we have to redirect those funds and what it is we need to do to dismantle those systems day in and day out. And so I think that's where self-care is for me. And I think it's going back to those roots and doing that unlearning. And I think that it, like Pascale said, the hype and the online vibe will happen today or tomorrow, but it's how do we implicate it in the way that we discuss shadism and how that's implicated in anti-Black racism and shaming members of the Black community and dark-skinned, melanated folks, melanated folks within our own communities, and how do we create space and how we challenge that. And I think the other thing I want to keep in mind is implicating the social determinants of health, right? The social determinants of health is an outcome that is impacted by systems of anti-Black racism that are further exacerbated during COVID. And how does that translate for Black and brown bodies and Indigenous bodies? How does that translate in our community? How it translates is in a rise in houselessness, a gentrification in low-income communities. How it translates is cutbacks in healthcare. How it translates is particular hospitals up in Scarborough and Melvin not getting the service that we need within the Scarborough Health Network. Who are we electing? It is about partisanship. Is it about the principles and policies that people hold, right? And how are we holding folks accountable? And so it's multi-pronged, the approach. And so that's how I really understand wellness and health, because oftentimes it's depoliticized, it's attached to capitalism, and people who generate the knowledge are disenfranchised from the conversation. So that's how I'd like to address that.
Thanks, Darshika. I did have one more question, so Pascale, I'm going to ask you to do that one instead. So what does it mean to make a concerted effort to better understand and support the issues of other community in an active and an ongoing way?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the key word in that is active and ongoing as well, but definitely active. For me, I think it starts with the personal. I think so much of this starts with the personal. So much of understanding, unpacking, educating starts actually with like understanding where you yourself contributes to the system, how you yourself, your presence, your privilege, your everything contributes and allows anti-Black racism to continue. And then moving that onion further and further, like the layers further and further out, going from personal to your family, to your culture, to, you know what I mean, your workplace or so forth. And then once you start off at the personal, this is how I, you know, help people kind of, you know, really move from just an idea to kind of going is, you know, you start with the personal, understand how yourself is implicated, and you make commitments to yourself. I used to do these workshops literally on this, and I would go and like almost plead with people to care. And so one day I was like, actually, I don't care if you care about anti-Black racism. I actually don't care. I'm doing what I need to do. If you want to do it, you will do it, right? And so by flipping it on its head, putting the onus on yourself, making the commitment with yourself. You're not going to do something because there's a paycheck attached to it, because you know it's the right thing to do at your work or whatever. Like, do it because it's a commitment that you have made with yourself, a commitment to challenge anti-Black racism within yourself. And I think for Tamil people particularly, it can even start with like challenging colorism and how that shows up in your families, and how so much of that is actually rooted in anti-Blackness and a fear of Blackness, right? Challenging your families, challenging your circles, challenging your friends, like these things that we know, actually doing that work, actually doing it, not running away from these really difficult conversations. And they are very difficult conversations. I want to recognize that. No one is saying any of this is easy. No one is saying it is easy to challenge your racist uncle, challenge your racist father. No one is saying any of that is easy. But what we are saying is that the world that we deserve, all of us collectively deserve, means that you have to do that. Means that it actually, that discomfort is worth it in the end. I think also challenging, like, you know, Darshika said it at the very beginning, challenging the model minority, and understanding how, like, I see this oftentimes in Black and Indigenous communities and Black and Indigenous movements, particularly how forces outside of us, whether it be the media or the state or whatever, tries to pit our communities against each other. And we do that too, right? Like interracial, like between racialized communities, we can do that too, but understand as to how, when you're going for a job, when you're going for an interview or whatever, how the idea of, you know, if we need a racialized person, how do we get the safest person, how that needs to be also challenged as well. And how the model minority actually, what it is inherently is actually anti-Black, because it is a reference to Black people. It is actually in comparison to Black people. The model minority that exists from East Asian, Tamil, Brown communities is in relation to Black communities, right? And so how are you, I guess, showing up and allowing yourself to get the things that you know that you deserve, but not on the backs of? A lot of my educating oftentimes just has to do with difficult questions. So I don't have all the answers, but I have these difficult questions that I think you should sit with and understand that you really have, you inside of yourself have the answers as to how you are willing, how are you willing to give up? What are you willing to give up to create a world that is actually equitable and a world that actually considers all of our freedom? Yeah, I also saw this thing, again, my thoughts are a little disconnected. I also saw this thing online that had said, you know, Black people die, white people join book clubs. And I found it really, like, it's one of like morbid laughs. I was like, oh, ha, 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 oh, that's really, really, really morbid. But it's actually true, like actually like really, really, really true. Like in the like where people in this moment right now are where we needed them to be 30 years ago, right? Like the kind of consciousness that is coming. I'm like, how many Black people gotta die for us, for youth now to understand that you need to read a book about Black people? Right? And so also understand that while this work is ongoing, this work is active, this work is slow sometimes, there's also a lot of urgency because every day our life is counting on it, right? And so it may not be in a day the conversations you're having with your family will go the way that you need to do, they need to go. But how are you continuing to do that work and maybe not getting hung up on that solely, and understanding that there's more work to be done. And we can't wait for a perfect situation. We can't always wait for an outcome that is the best case scenario, because again, like our lives are counting on it, and we're counting on actually real change to happen every single day. Yeah. I think to answer this question, but I think a lot of questions that have come out here, and the question really like I always think about and thinking about allyship. What are you willing to give up? Mm-hmm. What are you willing to give up? I think like that is, yeah. And I can't answer that question for you. Darshika can't answer that question for you. Those are commitments that you need to make with yourself. What are you willing to give up? And recognizing that actually like your freedom is tied to mine. It is like a world where we are liberated. It doesn't matter how many Black people, how many Tamil people are in places of leadership. Our actual intrinsically our freedom. I'll even go a little further. My family in Haiti, like your family in Tamil Elam, like your families actually, like those individuals, like those people's freedoms we're tied to one another, right? So, yeah, that's a commitment I think that you just need to make with yourself, daily, weekly, monthly. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for riveting conversation. I do definitely want to open up the floor for folks if they do have any follow-up questions or any other specific questions. If you feel free, you can even just privately DM me as well too, or you could just open it up to the Zoom chat, or if you want, be brave, you can unmute yourself as well too. So I'll pass the floor up to the participants here. Okay, I do have a question. Someone private messaged me. I attended a public union webinar last night. Suggested I look at my collective agreement through anti-racist lens. How do I create a space when the executive and all senior executives in the board of directors is not diverse, aka all white?
How do you create a situation that it's not all white people?
How do I create the space? I guess this is tough when everyone is already white, but I don't know if you could speak to that.
Sorry, can you say it again? I probably
Yeah,
should.
definitely. I attended a public union webinar last night. Suggested I look at my collective agreement through an anti-racist lens. How do I create a space when the executives and all the senior executives and board of directors are not diverse?
Okay.
Pascale, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I can kind of take a stab at it and maybe come back when I think a little bit more. I think sometimes some of the structures that some of our workplaces are built on, unpopular opinion, are just inherently anti-Black. I think it's like sometimes, like I just want to start off with that. If you are working in a workplace that there are no Black people, if there are no racialized people, your workplace is probably already a violent workplace. And I say that with the full understanding that I've also been in those workplaces. And I'm like, there's nothing to say it, but they're violent, to be honest. The best white people, let's be honest, the best white people are still going to end up spewing a lot of violence, right? So I want to start with that recognition there and understanding that it will never be where it needs to be solely because of the fact that there's only white people around that table. What I would do is maybe get some input from outside individuals who are Black, whether it be your membership, if that's kind of the structure that you have, whether it be folks in the community who are nearly like if you are centered in, your workplace is in, I don't know, Thunder Bay or whatever, like the community of Black people, particularly there, who can speak to, what their experiences are like in that surrounding neighborhood, but also like what they expect from you as an organization. That is maybe a second way that I would get insight. I wouldn't get any kind of info that you are asking from Black people to share with them. It has to be paid. That's also another thing too, right? Like, don't take advantage of the time, labor, love that individuals are going to be putting into that. Be ready to be told that you're wrong and that you need to scratch and start all over again, and understand that that is actually a very loving thing for somebody to do, and say that this is actually all wrong, we need to do it better. That's what I have so far. Darshika, you want to take it? I'll jump off of you if I have anything left. 100%.
I think, thank you for the question. And I think that, Pascale, I've worked in various unionized environments, and dealt with collective agreements both as a worker, but also as a member of part of management. And I think that, in a situation like that, Pascale addressed it in perfectly by being able to speak to people in the community, leaders, community members who'd be able to support you in this call. Because really, when it comes to community, defining it within the terms of the collective agreement is one thing, but the union movement is much larger than that. And at the end of the day, the union, whether it's membership, we are all accountable to people, and we are all accountable to larger community. So in one space, if you feel that you are cut off from being able to impact change, move up the ladder with like-minded allies in other spaces, racialized folks and Black identified folks, and center their voices and support the work in bringing them to positions of leadership. And that's whether it's bottom up or top down, by moving in. If you feel like a door is closed in one spot, I think in one place, then and opening another door or gaining access to other doors that may open up is pivotal to be able to making change. Because change is consistent, it's ongoing, and it has to be active. And the other thing that I would say is it's really important, as Pascale said, to pay people for their work, especially Black identified folks who are giving their firsthand lived experience and knowledge. And when we're talking about wealth distribution and we're talking about the labor movement, you know, anti-Black racism exists in all ends of the political spectrum. And oftentimes it's very easy for us to direct attention to the right, which can exacerbate white supremacy and emit it in such overt ways, whereas it's much more systemic and subtle on the left, and it can also be very overt. But recognizing that it's on all parts of the spectrum, Black identified folks need to be brought together, space needs to be created, and as an ally, as a non-Black Tamil ally, sitting outside that space and taking direction from Black members of the labor movement or within your union local particularly, or within the union leadership, finding those like-minded allies is critical to opening other doors and building momentum over time. So it's great that this has been identified. You've made that effort to really step into the room and have that conversation and look at your CA, but it really goes beyond that, because now you're invested in creating that long-term systemic change.
Thank you. I do see Raina with her hand up, but there's a follow-up question to this. I think it's just the same question, but in the private sphere. What do you think about corporate strategies for diversity and inclusion? Is there a way to be anti-racist in these spaces? Pascale?
I saw this graphic online, and it showed how in the top, I don't know, like a bunch of different corporate companies, what the demographics were like. And in like the highest senior positions, there was always only one racialized or one Black person, and it was always in the diversity inclusion role. Always, every single time, y'all, every single time. Like top 20 highest PERT people in the workplace. Like I'm talking about Hudson's Bay, Kraft, Nike, like so many corporate organizations. One racialized person, one Black person, always in that role. So that's like one piece of it. I just don't always think that diversity inclusion means justice. And oftentimes when we create these positions, we allow racialized Black people into these positions, and they are, you know, they're one person having to carry the brunt of so much work. They're the ones that have to answer to all the racist policies. They are the ones that have to answer to all of the racist things that happen. They're the ones that have to set direction further. They are themselves are dealing with their own racism or things from the organization. There's just so much pressure for that one person. And like hiring a person doesn't mean that you're actually undoing, actually unpacking the issues in the workplace. It doesn't mean that you are committing to a better future for the workplace. It doesn't mean that you're actually supporting racialized workers, right? And so I'm trying to think of how to be like productive and helpful in this answer. I always challenge conversations about inclusion with justice. It's like, is that what justice looks like? Is that what justice looks like for the workers in the workplace? Is that what justice looks like for the people that you serve? Because I imagine for a lot of them, one person hired, a representative hired, right? Like a racialized person, while it makes me feel nice, I'm like, oh, okay, this is cute. It doesn't actually mean the workplace is any safer for me. And so rather focusing on, I think, like getting somebody, like one person hired or doing like one kind of diversity inclusion role, what does it actually look like to you from the top up and the bottom up, from the top down and the bottom up, how to actually unpack all of the ways, all of the intricacies that racism and anti-Black racism seeps into the organization, seeps into the corporation, whether it be through their marketing, their policies, their bylaws, their hiring. Like there's so many actual pieces that inclusion can actually target. And oftentimes in these corporate organizations, what addressing a lack of diversity or lack of inclusion means is just hiring one person. And that's not enough. Like that's actually, I say personally, that's not enough. It actually does such a disservice to all of the workers in the workplace who actually deserves real structural change besides one person who may look like them, but their workplace isn't any easier or healthier or less toxic. Yeah, and I also like this question that somebody said, does this individual who's been assigned the task of diversity and inclusion actually have the support of leadership, the resources and backing of the organization to be successful in their role? That's a very important thing to also ask as well. And again, like, what is happening? How is this organization addressing these issues beyond the person, right? Because these companies, what they like to do is send the person off like, oh, this art diversity person can talk to you when issues come up, versus actually being like, there is structural issues that are happening within the workplace that contribute to these issues that are occurring, right? I just sometimes just see these individuals in these roles be used as scapegoats and opportunities, like as a way for them to deflect from the real things and deal with the real things.
I did see Rainu's hand up. Rainu, do you want to go next?
Sure. I've been listening very intently and absorbing so much. And I want to thank Darshika and Pascale and you, Melvin, for just creating the space for this conversation. And really, as someone who has some measure of influence and authority within the Ontario Public Service, I do feel a certain sense of accountability and you know, and purpose, and really what a lot of what has said has resonated with me. And I think a question that in terms of how do you create that distributed accountability, you know, beyond a single position that's focused on diversity and inclusion. How do you create a system and opportunities within that system that advance professionals who are very well qualified but do not have the same kind of opportunity, just because of historically the way we've dealt with talent management and a number of other issues. And so I really appreciate the ideas and the engagement and that you've shared. And you know, you touched upon there's leadership that happens so much on so many levels in the Ontario Public Service, and we live in an environment where we have a number of collective agreements that are in statute, and I often wonder why we don't see union leadership as well as on in terms of managerial representation. We don't see the same. We don't see what the representation that is reflected in the employees that we support and are part of our broader you know, department's accountability. And so I often wonder why we don't see greater representation in terms of union leadership. And I do certainly, we have regular conversations with OPSU and corrections. And I'm very proud to be working alongside women like Deborah and Nosa in terms of engaging not only our management colleagues, but bargaining agents around the issues of, you know, are you reflective of the members that you represent? And so we see the formation of a number of organizations that provide an opportunity for the voice of employees who don't feel represented either by managers or bargaining agents. And I think as a management structure, as managers, we have to actually say, look, we want to develop leaders. We want to develop racialized leaders. We want to develop Black leaders. We want to develop leaders that truly represent Ontario's workforce. And we need to say, look, there are many channels and opportunities to develop that leadership. If we're creating a culture where there's any kind of stigmatization because someone is involved, you know, as an employee representative or is gaining that leadership experience in a different way, we have to stop that. We have to really call ourselves out on that, because I think the more leaders that we can create that can help advance Black professionals, racialized professionals, the more we can clear a path as leaders, the more people there will be to help influence the way those voices are heard within the context of the broader Ontario public sector. So I just you know, recognizing that this is really a forum where, you know, personally, I want to learn and listen and see what I can do as a person of influence within the Ontario Public Service. That there are so many venues for advancement and leadership opportunities. And I think it takes not just the work that we do as senior managers within the public sector, but we need to look at the people who are representing us in those other positions as well. And how do we promote, you know, union leadership as opportunities as well, without stigma, because really it's going to take a partnership to advance that kind of movement within the public sector. So anyway, that was just my what I wanted to throw in there.
Thank you, Renu. We are reaching the 7:15 mark, and I do want to give Darshika and Pascale a final word. Can I just give you both a minute to just gather your thoughts and just, you know, say your final words, and I'm going to pass it off to Rosshane to just close the session out. So I'll start with Darshika.
Sure. Thank you, Renu, for your comments and TiPS for supporting this conversation. I just I wanted to say 3 quick points within this quick minute regarding public-private partnerships. This is regarding corporate social responsibility. I'd like to draw people's attention to the Bell Let Us Talk campaign, not the Bell Let's Talk mental health campaign. I'm talking about the Bell Let Us Talk campaign that was originated by the Toronto Prisoners Project, that talks about prisoners and inmates in jails who are forced to pay money into Bell telephones in order to be able to connect with their family members. And so this is where corporate social responsibility is deemed and outed as a facade. Because at the end of the day, what corporate social responsibility is really about is the bottom line and profit margins. And so when people's phone bills aren't pardoned, or, you know, people's phone bills are cut and mental health is impacted and houselessness happens because they're let out onto the street because they're not able to attend work, it's a snowball effect. And so that's what I think about corporate social responsibility. And I think that those people in positions of leadership, such as racialized folks, they need the support of the community. All the statements that were released during the BLM during these last couple of months were from public uprising. The public brought that forward, put pressure on corporate leaders to have to release statements in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. So I just want to say that. Renu, it's great to see you again. I know we met at the Tamil Women Rising event, and it's always a pleasure to hear you speak and your thoughts. I think what you said was really important and critical to understanding that people in power, such as yourselves, you need support from the larger community, and there needs to be opportunities for mentorship and examples like the municipal, municipally in the city of Toronto, there is the Muslim Fellowship and the Black Youth Fellowship, and the Muslim Youth Fellowship, I should credit Councillor Nathan Shan for bringing that motion to City Council and originating that, and it gave young people the opportunity to really come forward and create space within elected government and to learn and to be mentored in that space, and that's government funded. Those are committed government dollars. It'd be great to see something like that at the provincial and federal level, where young people can apply and gain that experience and that mentorship. But that being said, I mean, by having representative bodies, it's kind of like, it's the way power manifests itself within white supremacy. Just because we are the majority in numbers, it doesn't mean that we still hold privilege. There can be one white person or one individual who holds ultimate power, even though there's a whole room of people sitting around the table who are racialized, because that's how power translates itself. There are the masses and the working class and racialized bodies and marginalized bodies we're much greater in numbers, and yet we're considered minority because we don't hold access to power in the same way that identities who are privileged hold power. And I think that goes to say the same for the way that we engage community, because as much as we have these people in power who come from positions, come from racialized communities, they're unable to make the impact without support from the community. And so I think the two go hand in hand. We need to be able to ensure that there's mechanisms in place for folks internally to be able to move up the ladder so that we can see that representation, because representation does matter. But at the same time, we need to ensure that there's ongoing, consistent consultation with community members, and that is built as infrastructure that is unwavering and that cannot be removed, or in the same way that the charter dictates the way in which we're able to access democracy in free and accessible ways. Like, we need institutional policy put in place to ensure that the community always has a seat at the table. And I think that is how we speak truth to power in the way that we create policy. So those are my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshika. Pascale?
I just want to say thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this space. And I think just the last thing I would just say is, as folks in power and leadership and kind of working within the system, so much of we oftentimes forget who is actually impacted by the work that we do working in the system. And it's like, you know, our like poor communities, queer communities, trans communities that are like deeply impacted by whatever it is that we do systemically. And so our work inside the system is not it's not separate from those in communities. It's not separate from those who are unhoused and homeless. It's not separate from them. So our work needs to actually like engage them. It needs to actually include them. It actually needs to work for them. Yeah, thank you for having me. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you both. With that, I will pass it to our fearless leader, Rosshane.
I hate it when they call me that, but just want to say, honestly, what an honor it is to be able to host a space where conversations like this can happen, you know, where we're bringing the best perspectives from the community into conversations that we are having as public servants. To be able to bring a lot of active members in our community, you know, as I glance through the audience list, into the same space as public servants, and have healthy conversations like this, it's truly personally a fascinating success in my eyes, because I don't know that we do it enough, and I'm hoping that we can continue to do more of this. You know, as essentially an employee network, which is what TiPS is, we really are trying to find ways to build bridges, and this is an example of that. In order to create the best possible outcomes in the work that we do in the public service, we need to be exposed to conversations like this, no matter how uncomfortable it can be. We need to be engaged, involved at the community level, and we need to have courage. And then we need to take these notes and take it back to the work that we're doing at our desks, and continue to be active to show that allyship in our places of work. You know, in recognizing our place of privilege first, but then to use the access that we have to conversations to do good and to do better. You know, I meet a lot of great people doing great work in the public service, and very important work. And I want them to be recognized for the work they're doing. And I want more good people to come into the public service as a result. And so that's one of the reasons why we want TiPS not only to be an insular network within the public service, but to go out there and hold hands with members of the community. And, you know, I really want them to feel that they have the ability to make change, and not have their perspectives be silenced, and know that their community experience that they bring to their work in the public service is invaluable to the work that they're doing to inform public policies, programs, and services. So I feel a responsibility to continue to make space for conversations like this to occur. And I know collectively as an organization that is TiPS, the same goes. We are not an organization that claims to be a voice or a gatekeeper of the community, but we want to empower voices of others by giving them access to leaders in the public service and whatnot, and ensure that their perspectives are reaching the right tables and the right people. So my sincere gratitude to Darshika and Pascale for lending your time, your expertise, your energy. I know for a fact that we have all learned a lot and benefited a lot from this hour. Thank you, Melvin, for your excellent moderation and leadership, and Sarika
Yes.
as well for your support.
Yes, Melvin.
And Ramin and Darshika as well. And thank you to all those who've joined us on the call. I encourage you to stay plugged into the work that we're doing. Just quick shout outs. The next thing that we're up to as part of our sort of Raising Future Leaders series of programs, we are hosting hosting a youth essay contest. These are for students ages 13 to 18 years of age, and it's a creative challenge where we're asking our young members of the community to submit short essays related to this very topic that we talked about today, and how we can combat anti-Black racism and systemic discrimination in the world around us, right? It doesn't have to be specific to public service, but it can be. And we really want to hear really innovative and creative ideas. And also, as Darshika mentioned, the Muslim Youth and the Black Youth Fellowship, we are also involved in creating a Tamil Youth Fellowship at the City of Toronto. We're working with the Urban Alliance on Race Relations and Tamil Civic Action to make this happen, where we can actually take 5 young people from the Tamil community and put them into positions in city councilors' offices. So, and give them the opportunity to feel some ownership over a community project at the city level. So if you are interested in any of this in terms of getting more information, please check out our social media channels or reach out to one of us directly. And I would personally be very happy to chat about them and share more information. And that's all from me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, y'all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rosshane.
Have a great night, folks. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. It was my favorite part. I'm not gonna lie. I love reading the chat after.
Bye.
Melvin, amazing job. Thank you, Ram. Thank you, everyone. Sarika on the back end. Yeah, no, it was awesome.
I saw you, Sarika. Quick.
Really great job.
Honestly.
All right, y'all. Thank you for having me. Thank you.